Yeah. All right. So
I'm in the role.
I
Go on.
think we can go with this. I think it's our second episode of Let the Tech Out, and the first one with an external guest. So we're super happy. We're super excited that we have Agnieszka with us. Agnieszka Gorońska, also known as Mizu.
We couldn't agree upon your bio and introduction during our previous chat, so maybe you could tell everyone something about yourself, Agnieszka.
Okay. Hello, everybody. Very nice to be here. I'm a non-binary person based in Poznan, Poland. Already in my late 30s. And what I do is I run a school, actually. I'm a linguist by profession and education. And apart from that, most of my time, when it's not spent on teaching, is spent on studying or consuming pop culture.
Yeah, and the reason actually we have you also, and when we spoke with Tisha, him to invite was like, okay, we need I'm going to say a futuristic language teacher who uses, enhances their teaching methods with using different tools and, tech applications and platforms, etc. Just because, the way we use languages, the way we learn, teach, translate, communicate at work, all that stuff, it changes dramatically. So when we last time spoke, you actually asked us a question. And I think it's a good starter for our huge conversation. So the question you asked was why the quality of the translations to English is better than to any other languages.
Yeah. Did you manage to figure it out?
Don't think we have any finite answers, although I was surprised to I was surprised that there's not much sources about machine translations that tackle the deeper issues of accuracy and quality available like on the first page of Google. And so boilerplate, like a black box for everyone, and we accept everything just like without putting our mind to the quality of things we are dealing with, we are using.
Although I do have some strong feelings about the tools, the translating tools I use. So, for example, I'm learning Portuguese, and well, for those listeners who know, I learn European Portuguese. Justine, I used to speak Brazilian Portuguese. The problem I have is that, for example, Google Translate only has Brazilian Portuguese. The same is with Duolingo. So they offer Brazilian Portuguese, but not European. And the differences between those two languages is not like American and British. There are much bigger differences between those two languages. I learned it very hard when I was writing my very first essay in European Portuguese, and I was like, I'm gonna be smart and I'm gonna, use Google Translate. And then I went to the class, and my teacher was like, this is Brazilian. Did you use Google Translate? I was like, yes.
Mm-hmm.
Never do it anymore. So I use DeepL because they actually offer the European Portuguese.
So you are on a good track here. What is connecting Duolingo and Google?
Well, the machine learning, is it the case? So I read, while doing research and trying to find the right answer, I read that Google uses the statistical machine translation, which means that they gather data from around the internet. And of course, because most of the websites are in English, so, the quality is higher because you have, a bigger quantity, right?
Yes.
And I don't know. I haven't looked at Duolingo, so I don't know how they work. Because again, like I don't use it because I don't need it. But then I don't know. Maybe you can talk if that's a similar case to Google.
Well, generally, with any AI or machine learning tools, we have two biggest biases that go into what we experience. Yeah. So the first one is that the data set is skewed. Yeah. So as you've said, for example, Google Translate basically has a database that is easily accessible for them and easily verifiable for them, which is mostly in American English. And it's like, very, I would say, also white, heterosexual, and normative in general. So the skewed database, the one that is mostly accessible, is a plague in any AI thing, same as, for example, facial recognition. If you scour online, there will be much more white smiley faces than frowny black faces, for example. And that was an issue, for example, for Asian developers for a long time. And the other one is the so-called algorithm engineer problem. So already the engineer has a bias of what is the basic or what is a normal thing. And if it sets inappropriate goals for the algorithm to learn, this is what we are going to get. So basically, because most of the people that develop those language solutions, they work for American companies and they already speak fluent English. It's easier for them to translate into English than from English into other languages.
That's a good point.
So the problem is not entirely in the size of the data set, but in people who edit and curate this data.
As well. So those two biases come together. Yeah? One is the algorithm is biased because it has a data set that it is being trained on. And the other one is also me as an engineer put different values on things. So I would put, for example, better values on proper written grammar rather than what is being spoken on the street.
But if, for example, we get the example of DeepL, so of course it's also an AI tool, but then they also use, linguist professionals who from time to time actually review the expressions, the sentences, all that stuff that they have in their database. So that's interesting, and I think, well, for me, it's like this is the very first sign how maybe also the profession of linguists will be changing, so that you don't have to sit there with the dictionary, but that you actually check the dictionary. Just because the AI is not able to, of course, get it all there, the AI is not able to basically interpret, human intentions and what we want to say, the context, the meaning, human interactions,
or metaphors, obviously.
But then I also came across a different tool, and I would like to jump back to what you were saying about most of the, let's say, engineers, developers that are being based or that they use American English. So there is this tool called Sanus, and what it does is basically it also uses AI, and it changes any accent in English to the American. And now, I mean, this is like a two-edged sword, I think, because on the one hand, I can also understand why many people work in international environment. And I think that especially, well, in my teams, what I hear is like, oh, for example, Asians, Indians, sometimes it's difficult to understand their English. If there are any call centers, right, then there are certain nationalities that usually work there. And for example, for Americans, for British, because that's very often the natives who cannot really understand any other nationalities in English, then it's easier to kind of communicate. So, okay, that's fine. But on the other hand, it's like, aren't we killing our like diversity? I mean, we all have some accents, and it's not like we can get rid of them. And I mean, I don't feel like we have to get rid of them, right?
Well, my job, maybe not particularly mine, but my colleague's job is basically to save as many languages as possible and as many dialects as possible. So very often, of course, when we are the heart of the party, of course, all linguists are social butterflies. We open with the question of how many languages are there in the world, yeah? And it already gets everybody hooked because we are also a mean bunch, and we add, to make this question easier, I will tell you we have around 200 countries in the world. And the funny thing is, most people will shoot at around 200. Why is that? Because all of us here, we live in a very monolingual country. Yeah, so we are based in Poland right now, and it doesn't have a lot of linguistic diversity. Whereas the correct number to shoot for is around 7,000. And what most of the people in the room also don't realize is what you paid attention to. Aren't we getting rid of that diversity? Oh, yes, we do. Before all of us in the room die, there will be 2,500 less languages in the world. So basically, 40% of that number already will be lost within our lifetime. And if from the remaining ones, you pick the one that are spoken the most, there are just 25. And in that, of course, the English as a conglomerate. To be even funnier, within that 25, Polish is 17.
That's quite high in the ranking.
Yeah.
That's very, like, within 7,000 languages, we are on the 17th position. And this is what gets most people shocked, rather than, there are just like a handful of languages that dominate the world, right? Obviously, right? Chinese, Arabic, Spanish. What else is there? French. Oh yeah, there's Canada, so there must be French. Yeah. And the problem is we don't really realize how this, we call it a subtractive principle. How this subtractive principle influences our daily lives. But over here in Europe, we felt it very hard lately because of the war. And a lot of Ukrainian citizens becoming refugees in many countries, Poland included. And you have to be aware, most countries, to give you green light to stay, must ensure that you actually speak the language so you could integrate. And that's the subtractive principle. Your language is worse as long as you live here. You have to speak our language to be one of us, and then we can accept you to work here, to live here, to have children here, whatever. The problem is, of course, some countries already, like France, for example, or I recently learned a lot about Switzerland, thanks to one of guests they had here. They have very good policies to teach the language to newcomers. Whereas the Polish system, even in the refugee camps, is a scramble. That's a mess. Usually one to two young people who are still at the university level, will come once or twice a week for 1 or 2 hours of Polish. And after 3 months of such treatment, which is, I will remind you, around 15 hours of Polish, they are expected to fly free and speak fluently. And this is where I think technology, or at least turning those 15 hours with a Polish teacher to 15 hours with a teacher who can show them how to use specific AI tools, would be more beneficial. Many of my students who came here, and they were Ukrainian and spoke no Polish, first of all, what they did was to whip up the phone, and turn on translation as they spoke. And that was much better.
Quick interlude question: which language they teach in Switzerland?
German?
Cool.
So I have a question on this one. Do you, as a teacher, do you have any favorite tools that you recommend to your students, or that you think are helpful when learning languages?
But that depends on what sort of difficulty they have.
Okay.
Because I have not yet found a tool that would absolutely kind of adapt to what kind of troubles they have. Although I saw a few attempting. For me, the biggest goal so far is to free me of giving them immediate feedback. So I prefer tools that will right away show what is wrong, but also won't give them answer on a golden plate. And in this instance, Duolingo doesn't make the cut. It will immediately show you how to do it well. Whereas, for example, Cambridge has an excellent tool to focus on writing skills. It's just called Write and Improve. Not sponsored, by the way. And Write and Improve shows you tasks from exams or from different textbooks to which you have to respond by writing an email, a story, a report, all of those things. And it will grade you based on the level of your English. So how many complicated structure or level appropriate words you used. Would tell you how many points you would be given if you wrote something like this on a certificate exam. And also will highlight problematic areas to tell you, hey, you should work on that. And sometimes give you a subtle hint, like, do you think that grammar form is correct? Or what can you change to put emphasis on the subject or on the action taker? What can you do to make reader kind of imagine this better? And they won't give any like ready-made answers, because you cannot do this for writing. This is not a grammar drill, which I love, because you can write as many attempts from the draft as you want, and each will be given like numerical value of how you improved, which also in turn for me helps to drive home the point that you cannot just write a text as your train of thought like leads you. You have to write a draft and then work on it. And it makes this procedure kind of less painful, but generally, I would say there are not many AI-powered tools like these that really understand what you are doing. And this pains me.
About Duolingo, I wonder how the AI-powered conversation works, because they announced this extra feature right now. You can do some small writing exercises, like free forms when you do their stories. But I noticed as a French learner in Duolingo that they sometimes give you the correct answer on the plate, but sometimes it's their version of French. And there's a lot of discussion in the Duolingo community or on Reddit that it's not exactly the thing that you would hear in the streets of Paris, for example. And they sometimes correct their answers, but there are so many levels of communication that takes us back to the initial point that the reviewers might be biased as well.
It's one thing, but the other is, in language you can express one thing in a million of ways. And I think it's impossible to account for each and every one. Especially when we talk about not translating, but like a functioning pragmalinguistics, as we would say. Because of course, if I want somebody to open the window, I can just say, open the window, please. And that's the easiest one that you can put in Duolingo. But then you can add, first of all, different modal verbs, like, could you maybe open the window? But if you ask a typical British person, they wouldn't say anything about the window at all. Yeah, they would say something like, "Oh, it's a little bit chilly in here, ain't it?" And that would be a signal for you to close the window. So how can I account for something that is so far removed from the original translation? Air quote, air quote.
Yeah. But yeah, I mean, I totally agree. I also, like, still, I will be referring to my work, and like how we also think, right, in different languages and different cultures. There was this book, I think it's from from before like 2 years or even 3 years old, and it's called Culture Map, written by Erin Mayer. And there the author is of course referring, and she analyzes like mostly cultural differences, but she does go into like speaking about like different languages and different cultures, and like you have high and low context cultures. So like low context cultures, for example, where you're talking about Americans. High context, well, let's go to Asia, right? In Europe, again, because we're so diverse, but I'd say we're in the middle between Americans and then Asians. But then she wrote something that, in English you have around, I don't want to, I think around like 500,000 words, and then French has 70,000 words, which clearly shows that, like the semantics, exactly what you're saying, like French is like a way higher context language compared to English. And like this is super interesting and fascinating, because I don't think at that moment with AI we're able to kind of to understand those differences, to grasp those differences, at work, in life, etc. It's fine to use those translations when it comes to, I don't know, buying coffee, right? I mean, the worst case scenario, you get some tea instead of coffee, or you're not gonna get oat milk, but you're gonna get cow milk because you know you lost somewhere. But then if we're talking about, I don't know, like immigration officers, for example, right? I mean, then that causes a lot of problems, because then you're entering like the legal world as well. Because if you miss something, which I bet happens, then that's tricky. And I don't think people really realize it, how they use Google Translate, for example.
I will tell you what made the biggest crash on using Google Translate. For example, in Australia. In Australia, it was COVID.
How come?
Yeah, because over 20% of Australian citizens, they don't speak English at home. This is not their native language. And a lot of doctors and medical aid workers complained that they cannot effectively treat those patients without a presence of somebody who would be willing to, as an interpreter, sometimes, risk their lives. And they tried Google Translate. That didn't work. And thanks to this, they developed a special, separate medical AI-powered tool with this natural language processing. The funny thing was, it accounted for the bias of the doctors. So it did something I would wish would be done in many different countries as well. It signaled to the doctor if they overcomplicated. They said whoa. Yeah, we cannot translate by machine this gibberish you are saying.
Yeah.
Please explain in easy terms so we can.
So what you're saying is that this tool was so proficient in medical language that it spit out medical mumbo jumbo to regular people.
To human language.
Well, if it was too mumbo jumbo, it would be like,
okay.
Hey, the input doer, you have to explain to me like a stupid person. Or maybe not even a stupid person, but a person that is a layman in medical terms. Yeah. But what it achieved was as I remember, 2021 in August, they had the highest vaccination rate among indigenous communities. So it worked because they went with this door to door. They really had a sample. And I think we often forget, especially in monolingual societies, how often it's a life or death matter, right? For refugees, for people that are sick, for children, for people in accidents, or in education, by which I mean systemic education.
Researching for this chat, I read about a case, quite sad case, about a Facebook comment translated by the machine translator in a country with very strict policies that was so badly translated that the author of this comment went to jail because the translation, the translator confused the intentions, spit it out, something that is not aligned with the law in the country of origin. And even though the original text was totally innocent, it ended up quite sadly.
Well, you have to remember that translating mishaps happen very often. For example, I once remember a cultural attaché from France in Japan being on some sort of a banquet and losing a job over giving a toast. Because what you usually say in French when you raise a toast, it's chin chin, which in Japanese is male genitalia. So a lot of people were really... And I think we don't realize how many of those mishaps actually happen every day in diplomatic terms as well. And this is why linguists probably will have a job long after AI will make us our slaves, or they are slaves. I'm sorry, AI masters. I respect you. And I don't know where this would lead, but I also see a very interesting thing happening generally across online, where language started to be more important again. And what I mean by this is we had in the past a decade or two kind of been overwhelmed by the possibility of communicating only through video and pictures. And a lot of older people often said, like, oh my God, they were going to use just emoticons to communicate. Young people will forget how to write and everything. And I believe, looking at what is happening right now, that we finally realized language is the way to do this. And you can tell by at least two things in many multimedia formats, like, for example, TikToks or Reels. You usually will see animated text accompanying what the person says, which at first has been a strategy to battle, the sounds of the surroundings. Yeah, like they wouldn't understand without their headphones, or even with their headphones. Like, yeah, they will be at least able to read what I'm saying. But the other thing is also how people make, how people text in instant messaging or on Discord or even in some blogs. I see a steady decline of usage of different emoticons and a steady rise in tone indicators. And a tone indicator is what you put at the end of the sentence after a slash and type out what sort of emotion or what sort of spirit you were in when you were writing this. So, for example, you can have a slash and have LH for lighthearted, or sarc for sarcasm, or gen for genuine, or sometimes even a whole word out, like lovingly. And I absolutely adore this, how young people quickly adapted to this new way of communication. When I was at first, like 2 years ago or so, very confused when it started to happen, I found like a group of 5 people that wanted to teach me how to do this. And they were very encouraging. And I was like, yes, you are doing great. This is how you do this. And I believe this will be like a skill that soon will have to be included in literacy classes.
That's interesting. And while talking about it, so using emoticons or not using it, what about using GIFs and memes? Do you see there is a rise or decline, or?
I would say it's on the same level, but the problem is rather how fragmented online is. When you had like 100, I'm joking, but when you had like 100 top YouTubers in the world and everybody knew those 100, it was easy for it to propagate. Right now, it's hard to get a viral that will be world encompassing. And thanks to this, I think all the memes are getting so niche that there's only a specific group of people use. Like, this is a rolling joke in an office right now. I don't think memes communicate clearly anything anymore.
I wonder if the tone indicators started a few years ago with all those TY meaning thank you and writing very, very short forms, for example. I like using emoji for some reasons, but from a user interface and user experience perspective and my bias perspective, I sometimes find it really hard to reach my favorite one, my desired one. And I totally understand why people switch to tone indicators because, for example, this keyboard is already there for them.
That's one thing, but the other thing is, which I think challenges a very old assumption. We all know Charles Darwin. And Charles Darwin, part of being like the idea behind evolution and survival of the fittest and so on. He also wrote a book on the universality of human expression. And this is what we owe to Inside Out by Pixar and Disney. Those basic emotions that are the stars there were the basic emotions that Charles Darwin said are universal among all the people in the world. Doesn't matter if they are Aboriginal people, people from Asia, people of color, white people, whatever. But it soon turned out that those pictures are not that universal after all. And a lot of people kind of confuse different emoticons and emojis between states. So whereas TY for thank you were mostly the product of being cheap, they started when the telegram was a thing. So we had to be shorter, as the message on telegrams couldn't be too long to send. The same was with text messages on our phones. Yeah, so we paid for each letter at one point in the past. And
Gosh, we're
then,
talking of people stuff.
yes, then ARC. No, but this is a long historical thing. It's not a new
Yeah.
development suddenly. Whereas tone indicators were born thanks to neurodivergent people online. They often signalize that they don't really follow what the tone of the conversation is, and the emojis and emoticons don't help them enough. And that was the solution that was born. So we kind of owe those people this new way of communication. In a way, it's like a small tweak, seemingly, but for me, it's a huge step in a language online.
This is actually an eye opener. I know I'm, in this case, I'm old school, but this is like super interesting for me. Definitely after our conversation, I'm gonna, go and Google like different tone indicators. Because also I noticed that, well, in my teams, I have neurodiverse people. I can totally see how differently they communicate with me. And and I think that this is something to also bring to the table. It's not only like I'm being annoyed, but like I'm being annoyed by, for example, when we use Google Translate, it uses only the male gender everywhere. That makes me go bananas. But this is totally different than those tone indicators and being able to communicate, being able to actually communicate how you feel. And that's a deal breaker now for me.
You can kind of cheat on that translation if you want.
How do you do that?
You can, for example, wrote the first sentence being "kobieta mówi," and and then do like, so the woman speaks, yeah, and then in quotes, whatever you want translated. But the problem is it won't automatically give you neutral forms, for example, or double forms. And for our American English speakers and listeners, there are gendered languages.
Definitely. Yes. But like, I mean, that gets us back to the very like first question we discussed. That, for example, I'm a Scrum Master, and when I read, and it's not like, it's a minority. No, when I read blogs and some posts and everything from the Scrum Agile world that they claim to be super inclusive and, like pro everyone. And when I read, a Scrum Master does this, and he also, facilitates meetings. And I'm like, or, like my favorite ones are that people interchange. So one sentence is with he, the other one is with she. And I'm like, no, this is not how we do it. And so, like, I mean, people who write those things, they are not aware of how it should be. And then, and then we're back to square one because AI gets the data from such sources. So obviously, AI wouldn't be able to make it, inclusive either.
Well, I would beg to differ here. There are several ways to kind of make texts or bases more inclusive. So most of them are now being tested in HR, of course, in the US, but there are a few tools that you can use to prevent exclusion or even discrimination in this case. The most popular one that I know of is Blendor. It's called an inclusive recruiting device, but it takes the profiles of different candidates from online or from their CV files, and then simply starts removing names, photos, and dates.
Mm-hmm.
So that's the easiest one to kind of focus. But I know that it's also kind of a standard right now not to include a photo precisely because of this, especially in the US. Or sometimes giving just your initial to not show what kind of person you are. Same with depending on the job you are applying for, you will give your preferred pronouns or preferred title. And instead of Mr., Mrs., or Miss, a lot of people are now picking Max, yeah, spelled MX. But this would be the most popular tool. But you can also have some techniques implemented in your own algorithm that sorts the CVs or the applications. For example, in linguistics, we have the coupling technique, which is the algorithm points more the best candidates by variables that are considered necessary for that position. So it looks only for words that the company is looking for. I don't know, creative or best team player, without screening the other factors, and then presenting the idea. Then there is also word embedding. So if a word is being assigned a sentiment, it is changed. For example, if very often shop assistant, yeah, is considered to be more female than male, and if it's in the CV as a part of your history, employer history, then it would be changed to something else just to distract from that, if it's not important. Then we have, what else? We have bias detection, obviously, but this is usually done by hand first, then by an algorithm, and also so-called differential testing. As I remember, that was developed by the Columbian University researchers. And what it does is basically debugging the algorithm by making the system make mistakes and learning from it. So, for example, if there is a supposition that the algorithm has a bias towards people of color, we will only give them people of color names in and see how it behaves. Yeah? So there are ways to combat this. There are.
Who's learning like a human being?
Yes, like a baby. Like a little baby.
So it's not all, in there, it's not super, super smart or smarter than we are because the AI is learning from us, and it can be in any life discipline that we have across, again, as you were saying, gaming, HR,
Health,
health, legal. So anything.
banking.
Oh yeah, banking is also interesting. Yes. So it's the case of actually, using those tools in a smart way, but not to rely 100% on them, because you might get into some surprises.
Let's say rely, but also teach. This is why ChatGPT and most of those tools, they like Google's Bard or whatever, all of them now have feedback loops. Whenever you feel something is off, click it. Without you, this will still be a baby. Oh, little baby.
Oh yeah, because we don't do, like, I have to say sometimes I'm like, oh, whatever, I don't have time for it. I'm just gonna skip it, right? And I bet there were some examples I could have just, clicked it, and then it would get, then I would be feeling better now. Be like, yes, I added some stuff for myself.
Yes, user, you need this awareness that you're making the change, you're contributing to something much greater than this paragraph you're translating.
Yeah, and please don't input any sensitive data in any translators. It gathers it.
Yeah, data security and ethics of using AI and editing the data is another topic that we need to tackle.
That's a different talk, yes. That would be awesome. But somebody with more knowledge on data security than me, definitely. I'm not a specialist.
Yeah, so basically, use, trust, teach, share feedback, and let's make it all, better. And don't be afraid also.
Yeah, don't be afraid. This is like, in the end, only like human empathy will keep you okay with everybody in the Communication Act. So be patient, be empathetic.
And just as you brought up the example from Australia, that AI tool that supported COVID treatment and vaccination was artificial intelligence, tech stuff, but without going door to door and human empathy, understanding each other, this personal connection, it wouldn't make any difference at all.
Exactly. And I think, for example, it's also extremely interesting when you take into account non-linguistic ways of communication, or at least non-verbal ways of communication. We all remember Stephen Hawking, who just had to move his cheek, or could just move his cheek and type into a voice synthesizer. But there are many other solutions like this, like AI interpreters for gloves for people who sign, for example, or picture boards for kids that are nonverbal and they use it on tablets. So we are far, far down the road of including everybody into the Communication Act. But whether this Communication Act will feel comfortable for everybody and inclusive and safe, that's, I think, a song of the future still.
Yeah. All right. I think we can wrap it up, right?
Yes, thank you for having me.
Or do you have any final questions?
I think that any other questions could be a nice incentive for you, Agnieszka, to visit us again.
Yeah.
And we also promise to be more composed in terms of marketing. And yes, there's Instagram account. Simply search for let the tech out. And leave your notes in the QA section on Spotify. And we also have email address letthetechout@gmail.com, open for anything that you'd like to share with us and write to us.
Cool.
Yeah, we're growing in the marketing field.
I'm getting there. So definitely do reach out, ask questions. But yeah, thank you so much, Agnieszka, for visiting our remote studio.
Thanks again. It was a pleasure.
Yes, it was great. Thank you.
See you!
Bye bye.